In 1879, Sir William Crookes discovered that when a negative and positive terminal was attached to a vacuum tube, in which is contained a pinwheel fitted with paddle wheels, energy in the form of a ray causes the pinwheel to rotate away from the cathode and towards the anode. He coined this force radiant energy. And we may as well have a look at what radiant energy is all about. Okay, J.J. Thomson witnessed Crookes' demonstration, and in 1897, after carrying out his own investigations, he reported that the mass was 1,000 times smaller than the lightest known atom, confirming for the very first time that the atom could be subdivided. He renamed this negative force electrons, which has stuck ever since. Of course, Rutherford in 1911, Bohr in 1913, Schrodner in 1925, and Pauli all made major contributions to the atomic theory. But none of them proposed that the energy that holds the atom together is itself the primordial soup, interacting, containing and binding all matter, although they did identify the photon. One must ask the question, is the radiant energy demonstrated within the Crookes tube the same as flows within a copper electrical circuit, or is it an independent carrier? Thomson may have failed to consider the possibility that the events he measured so accurately were based on the impact against the paddles and not on the rays themselves. This anomaly was not revealed until the mid-20th century, when it was discovered electrons could blink out of existence, leaving only the energy behind. And on material impact, the same energy carriers may be rematerialised in subatomic form. It is my contention that the electron theory is nothing more than that, just a theory. It is also my contention that electrons can flow only through a conductive medium as just one component of a duality known as electricity. This electrical flow must be accompanied by an external magnetic field, manifest from the surrounding energy environment, and opposed by a reactionary medium. I believe in a reactionary universe that permeates every magnitude with an elastic and resilient entity, which many of you may refer to as aether, but which I call fluoroplasm. Whenever this medium is disturbed, normally by the interaction of matter, it sends out a pulse with an intensity proportional to the disturbance, and this I term radiant energy. It is comprised of a dynamic sea of photon pulses that act as an interface between energy and matter. I see it as nature in a state of flux, a dynamic imbalance that radiates in all directions from its source, as distinct from conventional electrical flow, which is confined to a conductive circuit. It can be manifest in many forms: solar, magnetic, optical, acoustic, gravitational, nuclear, electronic and cosmic, and with appropriate machinery may be utilised to do work. Whenever radiant energy interacts with matter, it always produces a kinetic material reaction. To apply these forces of nature, we need to provide a suitable gateway, a fertile environment, a potential to cohere, focus and isolate these forces, and a compatible exit to apply the output in a safe and organised form. Any discussion about radiant energy cannot begin without first giving credit to Nikola Tesla, for he is truly the father of polyphase AC electrical power and the first to utilise radiant energy as a power source.
In 1899 to the very beginning of 1900, Tesla spent nearly a year working on the largest laboratory he ever built, and that is Colorado Springs Laboratory. In that one, he built a huge Tesla coil with 15-meter diameter secondary coil. The top of the high voltage terminal of the transformer was connected to a high antenna. The antenna was about 60 meters high, and it was connected to the ball on the top of it.
When the Colorado Springs Tesla coil magnifying transmitter was energized, it created sparks 30 feet long. From the outside antenna, these sparks could be seen for a distance of 10 miles. From this laboratory, Tesla generated and sent out wireless waves which mediated electrical energy without wires for many miles.
Mr. Tesla, what's that big pile of papers down there on the floor?
My file on the work in Colorado Springs.
Can you tell us what's in it?
It's a new electrical system, completely different. As yet, it hasn't been finished.
In just what way is it different? How will it affect us?
Well, a great deal of it is merely guesswork, but it might have an important impact on the future. I hope it will lead to a decisive answer to the problem of energy. Good day, gentlemen.
And there you are. That was 100 years ago. We're going to solve the problem. As we see here, Tesla appears to have succeeded in transmitting and utilising radiant energy. But he still needed to use an input power source. As he stated, it required further research before declaring it a viable system. This research was to be carried out at Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island, but P.J. Morgan, the richest man in the US and Tesla's backer, never allowed it to proceed. You might say Tesla was the first victim of corporate greed, and Morgan deprived the world of a potentially clean and viable power system. Here we see the tower and the patents for the magnifying radiant energy system to be installed in the tower. Notice I said magnifying radiant energy system. Unfortunately, because of Morgan's black ban, Tesla had to abandon the project, and it was demolished with dynamite in 1909. Tesla claimed that by using pure radiant energy, the output could be magnified hundreds of times greater than is consumed in the input. This would be achieved through a spark gap, employing a very high DC voltage and frequency to trap the electrons and free the radiant energy component. By this means, electron flow and the accompanying magnetic field could be eliminated, and the opposing effects of the fluoroplasmic field would be rendered ineffective. He also claimed that this system could transmit unlimited electrical energy to anywhere on the planet, whether land-based or mobile. If this is true, then this system could have solved all of our problems and allowed us to utilise nature's renewable resources with maximum efficiency as a global network. So if we have a look on the right-hand side here, we can see his famous pancake coil. And what we have here is a sort of like a capacitor. These big balls he had at the top, this was one plate of the capacitor, and the receiving one was another plate of the capacitor, and between that was the air, which was the insulator between the two. So whatever happened here was received here, providing they were both tuned to the same frequency. And if you notice down here on the receiving end, we have the primary coil in this case is the high voltage coil, and the secondary is only about 1 or 2 turns, so we can bring his voltage down to where he can use it to make lights and to run motors, etc., and that sort of thing. Over here is the actual design of the coil system that was to go into this tower. Does it look like that? No, it doesn't look like that. It's totally different. And yet in this patent, he refers to this as a basis for his whole design. And he doesn't give one word why he changed from a pancake coil back to another cylindrical coil here. And put this smaller coil on the top, which is connected to it. Actually, in other literature that wasn't in the patents, he claimed this was producing more power by putting this little one on the top than was occurred in this particular system over here. So when everybody raves over his pancake coils, they should really be looking into this system over here, because this is what he had to cause his radiant energy up the top here. In addition to that, if you have a look here, you can see a capacitor there. So you can use a capacitor for this system, or as he's got here, he's got a very high voltage DC generator that he uses on this particular system, so you can use either. So in 1897, before the New York lab was destroyed in a suspicious fire, he did some basic research on natural and transmitted radiant energy. For this work he was issued US Patent 685-957, which explains in detail his method for tapping cosmic and other radiant energy sources. Here we have 3 different methods for tapping and utilising cosmic radiation. Tesla stated inter alia, the radiation received by the aerial is positive and connected to one plate of the capacitor, whilst the second terminal is connected to ground. So what Tesla is saying here is that cosmic radiation is a linear force, it's not alternating power, as claimed by other people we'll get to in a moment. And the feeble current flows continuously into the capacitor, even to the point of rupturing the dielectric, if not sooner discharged through the load. So if you left it to charge up, it would actually break the unit. There's that much power would be developed in it. Tesla also pointed out that a battery may be used in the circuit to provide the potential difference instead of the antenna circuit. So you can use it either as a power source or provide the environment for using radiant energy. This suggestion was taken up by Shenetsky and Edwin Gray, which I'll discuss a little bit later. So here you can see the antenna, that's fairly obvious, and there's a plate underneath here, and between there there's a capacitor for these people who are not very electrically minded. And what happens when this capacitor gets charged up to a certain amount, this switch over here interacts. This could be either a manual switch or a mechanical one, or an automatic one. Once that switch closes, of course, they've got power to run through whatever's over here until the capacitor runs out of charge. On the next one, we're actually running a motor. And here we see a reed switch. And what happens is when this capacitor gets charged up to a certain point, it'll close this reed switch. They'll be attracted together by electrostatic action. That causes the flow of electricity to come around here, run this electromagnet, which pulls in this armature, which is attached to a paw and a sawtooth gearing round here. Now the speed of that motor will be determined by how quickly this reed switch opens and closes. And the power of this motor will simply be determined by the strength of this electromagnet. So it could be quite an efficient motor. And of course it doesn't fully discharge the capacitor. As long as the amount of power coming in here either equals or exceeds the amount of power being used here. Nice big capacitor bank, and it probably will. Over here we've got much the same thing, except for this solenoid is operating an external circuit. We have a battery here, so he's getting power from this battery, and all he's doing is providing a pulsed DC circuit. Don't forget we didn't have any semiconductors in those days, so he may also have been using this battery to act as a sort of a diode, so the power only ran one particular way. The last one here, he's got a mechanical switching arrangement. He's got a patent for this. So he can control the frequency of this whole thing. simply by rotating this barrel and have it making different connections as it goes around. And of course, when power comes through there, it goes through the primary, and now we can feed a secondary circuit and drive the load over here. So it's a very simple device that I haven't seen anybody build. So damn simple. This is a summary of a news report in 1919, and we're talking about Hubbard right now. A.M. Hubbard built a device he called an atmospheric power generator. He ran an 18-foot boat, 10 knots an hour, driven a 35 horsepower motor, on Portage Bay in Seattle. When the drive motor was disengaged from the propeller, it ran free at an estimated speed of 3,500 RPM. The coil system used as a power unit was 11 inches in diameter and 14 inches long. According to Hubbard, tests on the coil showed a pulsing current of 280 amps and 125 volts. That's 35 kilowatts of power. He believed the power from this device would last many years. So if you have a look on the left drawing here, you can see the boat he was running with this. And here you can see his transformer here. You can see it's about the same size as the motor. It's providing all the power for this motor. And here you can see the two cables coming out from them, substantial size cables to carry the amperage he needs. And the second cable goes up to the control device. Don't know who's sitting in here. It may be him himself, Hubbard, or it could be his father. Because on the drawing down the bottom here, and I don't know whether you can all see that, that's the side elevation of the boat. There's 3 people in it. This chap sitting in the back, as far as I know, was the chap they were trying to impress to get him to invest in it. This is probably Hubbard himself driving it. Then there's on the article in the newspaper, it said his father went along, so this is probably him sitting up there. This drawing on the right-hand side was taken a year beforehand by the same newspaper, this article. That's in his own workshop. There's his lathe behind and bits and pieces on his bench. And here we see his actual transformer. You can see that's been wired. The outside tube has been wired up. It looks like copper wire to me. And this is a globe over here that was operating. And what Hubbard said, that within a year I'll run a boat on the bay. And he kept his promise, and that's over there. 9 years later, in February 1928, Hubbard and his transformer again made headlines, this time in connection with a fuelless motor, designed and built by Lester J. Hendershot, which Hubbard claimed was also a nuclear power device based on Hubbard's own design. In this interview, Hubbard revealed for the first time that his transformer was powered by radioactive substance. He sold most of his rights of this invention to the Radium Chemical Company of Pittsburgh for just $2,000 American. And it may be assumed that the radioactive substance was indeed radium. But it really doesn't matter. Any alpha or beta radioactive source would have done just as well. I will not go into the Hendershot device, as I've already written a comprehensive book on the subject available from UTEC. However, it is interesting to note that Lester Hendershot had an accident. He was put in a wheelchair and kept quiet for many years. In the end, he decided to go public and reveal the details of his generator. So he set up an interview with a journalist, but before that could happen, he died in his garage in April 1961. Supposedly, he committed suicide. As can be seen from the Hubbard's own drawing, his device consists of 10 tubes. A central hollow tube surrounded by 8 smaller tubes radially displaced and parallel to the inner tube. An outer tube, acting also as a container, surrounds the entire device, with all tubes cut to the same length. The rods of nuclear material are packed tightly inside the central tube, around which is wound a copper wire coil, and each of the 8 smaller tubes also have windings. The outer tube also appears to have windings, which are then wrapped in insulating material. Apart from these obvious facts, we know nothing more about the device. But on April the 30th, 1989, a patent of an almost identical device was issued to Paul Brown of Boise, Idaho. Brown had taken up the challenge to try and duplicate Hubbard's device and had partly succeeded. However, his unit produced only 70 watts of power and he had problems stabilising the frequency. I am unsure if he solved these problems or whether he improved the output of his device. However, Brown only used one single needle of strontium-90 in the centre of his prototype, whilst Hubbard packed many radium rods in the centre of his. This indicates that the output is probably proportional to the strength of the radioactive source. So simply put, Brown's device is a beta-voltaic electric generator. Ions are generated by the absorption of alpha and beta decay in the region of the electric potential field, resulting in a charge separation with an accumulation of electrons at the elevated Fermi potential. These electrons in turn give up their energy through an external circuit and load in the conventional manner. A tuned oscillating transformer design is chosen because losses in the system can be reduced to only the ohmic resistance. That's to say, the capacitive reactance must just counteract the inductive reactance, bringing the power factor to unity so as each balances each other and cancels each other out. The output is then defined by Ohm's law and the ratio of the matched output transformer. The bottom drawing on the left shows the basic system. The system is a nuclear radiant energy interacting with the primary circuit. The capacitor C and the primary coil L form a tuned LC tank circuit. As this is a series tuned LC arrangement, the current is maximised in the primary circuit. The secondary coil removes the excess current to drive the output load. Brown's generator is exactly the same circuit as the basic drawing on the left. All we need to do is to charge up the capacitor C to set the system in resonance and provide the Fermi potential to cohere the nuclear energy directly into electricity. So this is very important, so I'll spend a little time on this. This left-hand side, that's what we're going to talk about now. And the analogy of that is an old grandfather's clock. So if we turn back the clock 100 years to about the beginning of the 1900s, and we go and buy ourselves a nice brand new grandfather clock, not from the 1800s, it's a slightly different design, and he decides to open this glass door and give his pendulum a bit of a flick, and the pendulum goes backwards and forwards. After a little while it comes to a stop vertically. He has a look at it. I think this is buggered, I think I better send it back. And then he goes to pick it up and he realises there's a key on the left hand side, and he said, oh yes, that's right. He said, this works by a spring. So he winds and winds this spring, and I don't know if anybody's had an old grandfather clock, but it's about 150 turns to wind up this spring. And so he winds up the spring and he stands back and he says, I've done it. And he looks at the clock. Nothing happening. Dead as a doornail. So in his frustration he gives it another flick. And lo and behold, this pendulum now starts moving backwards and forwards in unison. It manages to keep the time. And it also, in conjunction with the spring, keeps the mechanism of the clock working. The hands start going round. And the analogy of this story is exactly the same as that drawing on the left-hand side. So here we have our pendulum. Over here, this is our capacitor, that's our pendulum. Over here we have our primary coil, and that's the working of our clock. And up here we have some nuclear material, alpha and beta radiation, nuclear radiation, being accepted into the circuit, and when it strikes the circuit it changes to electrons, and we get an excess of electrons. So if we charge up this capacitor now, give it a bit of a swing like our pendulum, so as we've got negative down the bottom here, so the power will now go round through here, go through the nuclear source, pick up more electrons, and down to here. By the time it reaches here, it's got too much power. And then, of course, now we've got the negative here and the positive here, and the damn thing swings back the other way. And it picks up even more power and goes back through the other end. And what's going to happen to that surplus power? It's going to go electromagnetically, they tell us. It's transferred to a totally separate circuit. No electrical connection here, just radiant energy. Going in now to the secondary circuit, and it runs the load on the other side. Now, so now you can see exactly how this circuit works. It's quite simple. And this circuit up here is exactly the same as this one down here. It doesn't look like it, but it is. Same electrical circuit, No difference, it only just has a slightly different configuration. But this is an absolutely brilliant circuit, because the radiation here not only affects this coil here, but anything that escapes through it also strikes the primary of this side and generates even more energy. And if that goes through there, we've got another coil here and another coil that can pick up this radiation. So by the time the radiation gets to the outside, there's none of it left. It's all gone. So let's have a look at the Shenetsky device. In early 1970, Dr. Shenetsky and fellow researcher Yuri Galkin worked on a basically new type of high-frequency radiant energy generator, very similar to the Tesla radiant energy spark generator and the Edwin Gray motor system.
The story leaps on to Moscow in 1980. A physicist named Alexander Shenetsky was working along similar lines to Tesla, although on a laboratory scale. In addition to his measurements, he had a crude system of light bulbs to indicate power output. Under certain conditions, high voltages and high pulse rates, he stumbled upon a startling effect. He writes of a surge of power at the heart of the apparatus and a sharp increase in power output. Over a period of 4 years, his research indicated that this apparatus could generate 5 times the power it consumed. Few of the scientific establishment in Russia or elsewhere took his claims seriously, but one top physicist from the West, interested in fringe science, did go to see Shenetsky in 1991.
We went to see his device. It was a very sort of dramatic demonstration. I was impressed. I went home at the first night in Moscow and didn't sleep very much trying to figure out how this thing could be working, whether it was a trick, what principles could truly be involved.
Shenetsky's papers talk of tapping the energy of the vacuum, language very reminiscent of Tesla, and a report published by the Russian news agency Novosti describes some of the extraordinary potential implications of his research, not least a new and non-polluting power-generating industry. Stimulated by what he'd seen, Puthoff finalized arrangements for Shenetsky to continue his work in the US. The Russian died suddenly in 1992, and no one has taken up his research.
Okay, this is how Shenetsky explained his radiant energy device. The self-generating discharge emerges when the discharge current reaches a definite critical density, and the cycloid movements are displayed. And don't forget, this is in a tube. It's got some gas in it. The current in the circuit builds up in a capacitor, and the additional energy is discharged through the resistor by the discharge circuit. Clearly, only part of the tremendous vacuum energy is extracted. In one experiment with an input power of 700 watts, 3 kilowatts was extracted by the generator to the resistive load, this being nearly 5 times the input power. This is by far not the limit, and with more powerful plants, megawatts of free electricity can be produced with minimal power input. Shenetsky envisaged a world of unlimited energy energized by unleashing power provided by his vacuum tubes. Here we see a mock-up of the design, and before we get into this, don't anybody try to build this, because if you build it like this, you're going to blow the hell out of those MOSFETs, because they need some protective circuit around them. Dr. Shenetsky demonstrated a device which showed enough excess energy to burn out a power station to which it was connected. It was based around a spark discharge in low pressure hydrogen, so he's running tubes with low pressure hydrogen in them. After he was killed, his work was never taken any further, not even by his partner Yuri Galkin. So you wonder what went on there. Instead of the aerial and ground used by Tesla, Shenetsky used a conventional power source. As this design is using a battery, which is the mock-up I'm talking about, the primary circuit is put into oscillation by the MOSFET, which is that little device down there on the right-hand side. This pulsed energy is then fed to the primary coil to provide the extra high frequency and voltage and magnetic coupling for the secondary circuit. The secondary circuit is then rectified into pulsing DC by the diode, which in turn charges the capacitor. When the capacitor reaches a high enough potential, the high-powered spark jumps the spark gap to supply power to the load. The circuit has to borrow energy from its surrounds to build the magnetic field around the cathode. The sudden pulse of photons across the spark gap results in the slower electrons being left behind, trapped on the cathode, which in turn then causes the magnetic field to collapse and feeds even more photons across the potential gap. Accordingly, field resistance is eliminated, and the radiant energy flow is greatly magnified by the time it reaches the anode, generating large numbers of electrons as the photons impact against the anode. They are created by the radiant energy force. Consequently, the output is much greater than the input power, 5 times greater according to Shenetsky. There you can see the breadboard version of that if you want to make it. 2 batteries, 24 volts. Off-the-shelf transformer, absolutely useless because he needs about minimum of 3,000 volts, probably a million volts there, translation. In addition to that, he needs a very high frequency, a bit more than you're going to get out of that other circuit that I've just shown you. But this is excellent just to demonstrate how it works. So here you have an ordinary off-the-shelf transformer. The best that can do is about 10 to 1 because of the impedance. This is a 10 to 1 transformer. We're going to get 240 volts on the output. That's going to go through this capacitor here, run the spark gap, and there's your load there, which in this case is just a piece of wire stuck between the 2 ends. So there you've got a bit of an idea on how you can make yourself a Shenetsky system. But he wasn't the only one who did that. Edwin Gray used a circuit with almost the same as Shenetsky's, discharging the capacitor through a spark gap to drive a pulse motor for use in an automobile. So if you look on the left-hand side here, this probably is a bit more like Shenetsky's circuit because he connected that to the mains. And that's what this system here for, is for connected to the mains. Over here we have a couple of batteries. Here we have our spark in the middle here. Here we have our capacitor. And over here we have a full bridge rectifier, and they put that on there because of the AC power. You can actually get away with this one if you wanted, if you're just using the batteries. So over the right hand side, thanks to Peter Lindemann, because I pinched this out of his book, saved me drawing it, you can see the simplified circuit. And if we cut this circuit just here, and we cut this circuit just here, then we eliminate all that top bit. And now we finish up just with the Shenetsky circuit. So we've got our negative terminal around here onto the bottom half of our capacitor. And here we've got our MOSFET. This is a oscillator. It's an oscillator system, mechanical one in this particular case. So that provides a primary on the transformer, then the secondary, so we can provide a positive charge on the top of that capacitor. Obviously, when that capacitor gets charged enough, it'll jump across the gap in this tube, and then what he's doing is actually charging his battery. He doesn't waste any energy at all, because what he does, he uses one spark gap to run his motor, which is up here on the right hand side, and when that's run the motor, he not only does that, he captures this same voltage back to the battery, as well as at the same time charging another battery, which he swings backwards and forwards here if you look at the switches. Very, very efficient device. And if he's getting over unity in that, the same as Shenetsky did, then give me one of those to run my car and I'll throw away the petrol. Okay, let's examine the Moray device.
The Sea of Energy in Which the Earth Floats was a revolutionary book written by T. Henry Moray, an electrical engineer and Tesla enthusiast who in the early 20s began working on a device he claimed intercepted radiant energy from outer space. His solid-state detector, the Moray valve, was designed with a complex series of semiconductors, high-voltage capacitors, and transformers hooked up to an antenna and a ground wire. By stimulating the existing oscillations of space energy, his radiant energy device ran for days, putting out 50 kilowatts of electricity. His public demonstrations attracted newspaper coverage and scientists from Bell Laboratories and the Department of Agriculture's Rural Electrification Administration. Although no one could find evidence of fraud, neither could anyone explain how the radiant energy device worked. During the 30s, developed semiconductors and transistors that were far ahead of their time. Unfortunately, as all too many inventors have suffered, when he refused to sell out to powerful interests, Moray and his family were threatened, shot at, and their laboratory ransacked. Ignored by the U.S. Patent Office, Moray quietly stopped public disclosure of the device after it was destroyed by his assistant, Felix Frazier, a communist sympathizer who was frustrated when Moray declined his repeated offers to take that technology to Russia.
Without a patent, it's a bit difficult to analyse the Moray device, which must therefore be based on deduction and any authentic material in the public domain. This is how Moray described the workings of his coherer in 1962, and that was about 12 to 13 years before he died. He probably didn't think at that stage he was going to market it anymore, so he let some of the information go. Oscillations by synchronization are started in the first stage of the circuit by exciting it with an external power source, such as the difference of potential between 2 points is using a battery, same as Brown, to kick it off. The circuit is then balanced through synchronization until the oscillations are sustained by harmonic coupling, using 2 circuits. And he's balancing those 2 together so they're the same frequency, adjusting them in some way. At the moment, he's not telling us what that circuit is. The reinforcing action of the harmonic coupling increases the amplitude of the oscillations until the peak pulses spill over into the next stage. So what he's doing, he's got a Tacoma bridge, if you like, and he's swinging and reinforcing it. It's exactly the same as swinging your child on the swing. If you can manage to balance those pulses, then you can get some real movement in that swing, and eventually you'll toss the kid over the top bar if you go too hard. So I wouldn't do that. These oscillating pulsations drive each succeeding stage, which oscillates at a controlled frequency, and which again reinforced by harmonic coupling with the ever-present energies of the cosmos. So now we know he's using AC power from the cosmos. The tubes are specially constructed ionic cold cathode tubes, end of quote. So what he's using here is radioactive tubes. More and more power. He then states vaguely that a capacitor is charged up and then allowed to discharge, probably through a coil, in the same manner used by Brown to capture the current reversals in the primary coil. And you see why I spent some time explaining that. He's doing exactly the same thing here. He's charging up a capacitor and swinging it backwards and forwards, exactly the same as Brown was doing. This pulsed oscillation is reinforced by the tuned antenna circuit, whereas Brown used a nuclear source and Chinetsky used a battery. They all use similar arrangements based on Tesla's earlier circuits. The difference with Moray is that he uses a cascade of radioactive valves to boost the power output. 29 valves, according to Moray, to produce 50 kilowatts of power. The top circuit is drawn by Moray and signed by him in 1937, which shows a hot cathode driven by a separate power source not shown, and some other device in the detector circuit. The lower circuit is from the McIlwraith patent 2032-545, dated 1936, a year before the Moray drawing, and is a radioactive receiver using cold cathodes. When Moray was developing his coherer in the 1930s, he discovered that he could pick up conversations up to 5 miles away using his diode device in a conventional radio circuit. Although the top circuit is purported to be the Moray power device, I believe it is his voice detector circuit that he gave to the US government for no money at all, for them to use for surveillance, audio surveillance tool. So the FBI was going to use this to listen in on conversations. It is clearly not the circuit used by Moray for his power system, because it does not meet any of the requirements specified in his previous explanation. So if we have a look at that, we can see why. First of all, you've got 2 wires here, and if you know anything about electrical circuit, that's called a hot cathode. it provides heat to the element in these tubes. 1, 2, 3. And if we could read these numbers down here, we'd know what external power was applied to those. As you can down here, you can see how much power is applied to these. Secondly, he says we have to separate each stage so as it doesn't spill back to the previous one. What do we have here? We have a feedback circuit, generally used in radio circuits to maintain the frequency, because it tends to drift unless you feed it back every now and again. So he's actually connecting these up. All three circuits are connected together. And he said, you can't do that, that's a no-no. Also, this is claimed to be the Moray valve, famous Moray valve. What the hell it's doing there, I don't know. Because if this is a diode, like it's claimed to be, it's used to make sure your pulses go only one way, which means it's got to be in this part of the circuit, or this part of the circuit, not in parallel to it. This means nothing. If your power goes one way, it goes through the coil and goes through all the capacitors, and will go through that diode. If it goes back the other way, the only thing that misses out is the diode itself. Everything else works the same. This is a parallel tank circuit, which is the only bit of the circuit that conforms with something he told us about, because this is an oscillating parallel tank circuit, it's called. So that's not his device. It is clearly not his circuit used by Moray to power his system, because it doesn't meet any of the requirements except for that parallel circuit at the beginning in his previous explanation. The bottom circuit is more suited to the Moray device, but would require some modifications to the front end to conform to his explanation of its operation. And the last stage of the circuit would be unnecessary. There would also be a need to decouple these various stages of the circuit. Unfortunately, I don't have a circuit drawing of his latest device without an antenna. But the Brown primary circuit would provide the answer for the input configuration. So all you need to do is whack the brown one on the front end. So what we need to do is make a hole here. Move that coil over there, move this coil over here and put a device in it. Something like this has been done. Then we need to separate these circuits here, one there and one here, so as each stage is separated. We've got to get rid of all this rubbish on the bottom and throw away this speaker operation on the end here. We only want the resistor on the end. So save a little bit of time, there it is for you. Here we see the Melcalrath circuit suitably modified. There are a number of possibilities for the coherer, which is a bit up the front, and the aerial circuit. It depends on whether the aerial circuit is designed for DC or AC input, but either can be configured to utilise the cosmic field, as I've already explained a bit earlier tonight. So his problem was not the technicalities of the thing, it was the unit cost. Moray said that each valve cost around $500 each in the 1960s, with only 2 or 3 of each batch of 100 any good to be used in the circuit. If each unit used 30 valves, as he just claimed, 29 amplifiers and 1 input, then the cost would definitely be commercially prohibitive, so you could never build the damn thing. In my opinion, the 35 kilowatt achieved by Hubbard with his simple device seems to me to be the much better commercial proposition. This is the last inventor I will discuss this evening. He is but one of many suppressed inventors that have gone before him. Stephen Mark came up with a revolutionary idea of capturing the inrush current that occurs every time a switch is thrown to breathe life into an electrical circuit. Why do you think you have a spring in your switch? Because if you just turn it over slowly, you'll burn it out, and that's called inrush current. In the early 1990s, he was successful and started to promote his idea by demonstrating his concept with his working prototype.
This weighs about a pound. We'll activate the unit now. This particular unit puts out about 100 volts, right around 100 volts, 100.8 volts. A little smaller. It'll vary between 95 and 115 volts generally. This is a 100 watt light bulb. Obviously, it's a base receptacle. No possibility of any kind of batteries in here. And with the aid of these two alligator clips, there you go. Another unit that is generating an amp of electrical current. There are physically no batteries capable of producing this much current at this voltage. These are inherently high voltage devices, and they only produce DC. So I'll turn on the primary frequency, and now the secondary frequency. The unit is now in operation. It's like a gyroscope. Perfectly solid state device, no moving parts, just the vibration as the device is in operation. Let's measure the voltage. This gauge is set at 1,000 volts DC. The unit is putting out 830 volts DC. To show you the current, we have set up these lamp bases here. They're just wired in series. These are brand new 100 watt light bulbs. Current gauge will measure the amount of current that's being produced inside the unit itself, inside the coil. Current 1.23 amps here. 1.23 amps at 870 volts. That would be at least 8 amps at 120 volts. These units can be used to power aircraft, ships, automobiles, homes, the kind of power that this
like a fire, not like a normal light.
So there you are, that's a magnificent device. And upon returning to the United States, after promoting his device here in Australia, actually went to Perth. And a bloke called Brian Collins got onto him and conned him, and that's a totally different story I won't go into. The FBI got wind of his invention and silenced him with the United States Secrecy Act. Some years later, he tried to defend his character by revealing some of the details of his device on the internet, and by berating his dissenters. In other words, he was being run down badly, as selling out to the establishment, and in fact he didn't. Again, the FBI jumped on him and threatened to throw him in prison and warned him that foreign terrorists could kill him for his secrets if he continued to go public. I don't think they were referring to foreign terrorists, and I think the threat was taken seriously. So tonight I have revealed 3 different radiant energy systems that can supply the entire world with all the energy you could ever need, none of which have been allowed to be produced commercially. The first was cosmic radiant energy, as proposed by Tesla, that in its simplest form can charge a bank of capacitors and provide energy to the grid on a 24-hour basis without sunlight or wind. Because of its simplicity, cosmic radiant energy farms could be set up and running within a year and may be constructed anywhere on this planet. The second was nuclear radiant energy in the form of a safe and convenient battery that could last for up to 23 years without recharging, using nuclear waste as proposed by Brown. So you could even get rid of the nuclear pile. Any university with adequate funding could have a commercial design up and running within a year or 2 if they wanted, and may then be used for automotive applications, a standalone, remote applications, or even to run power stations. The third may be defined as photon current, that can be cohered and separated from conventional electricity, as used by Shenetsky and Mark. These systems are ideal for baseload. This technology can be fast-tracked to be retrofit to coal and nuclear power stations. It can also be used for automotive purposes if you use the grey system. And lastly, we have Murray, who used a combination of these radiant forces. Because of government control of nuclear material, this is a project for universities to work on, which doesn't need to be built to Moray's exact design. If the transformers are radioactive, like in the Brown device, then the valves can be replaced by high-powered semiconductors, which may then be developed commercially. I have now laid the groundwork for any individual university or commercial entity to develop the radiant energy economy. Unfortunately, we're out of time, and so is the human race unless the powers in charge of this globe wake up to themselves and release and support the technologies that are vital to our survival. The most essential of these are the Alvin Weinberg thorium molten salt reactor, the Alexander Shenetsky radiant energy system, the Stephen Mark impulse radiant energy system, the Dmitry Petronov thorium plasma battery, or any one of the other 3 people murdered or died as a result of developing a similar type of battery. These and the other viable systems that I have discussed this evening may form the backbone of a viable radiant energy economy free from carbon pollution and the doomsday scenario of a nuclear holocaust. Those authorities who would seek to destroy this beautiful planet by their paranoia, greed and corruption must be held to account. This is a war that must be won if the human race is to survive. If we don't work with nature, then nature will take its own vengeance. On that note, I'd like to thank you all for coming and for giving me the opportunity to explain radiant energy. And God bless you all and keep you all. Thank you.